We have been talking earlier about the concept of irreducible complexity when it comes to biological systems. Would it be fair to apply that same kind of a term to what we're seeing here?
Well, it's a really tricky thing because living systems are a bit different from what we have here. I've been wrestling with this idea of design in astronomy for a long time. I think some creationists, some biblical people maybe see design where there isn't any sometimes, but I do see design here. I find it incomprehensible to me that this is all just an accident. Like the moon, the more I study it, the more I'm impressed with what we see there.
What do you see when you look at the moon?
The moon's different. we have like 170 satellites, or natural satellites orbiting planets. Jupiter and Saturn have scores of satellites orbiting them. We only have one. Most of the satellites are small, but Jupiter has 4 large ones, Saturn has 5 or 6 fairly good-sized ones, and the Earth has a good-sized one too, even though there's several larger than it is. But the moon's orbit is different. It's a little tricky. I'll try to explain this best I can here. The sun is 400 times larger than the moon. So if you had a ball the size of an inch across, that would be the moon, and the sun would be 400 inches across.
Wow.
Gives you a bit of scale.
That's not what we see, though.
No, because you see the sun is not only 400 times larger than the moon, but it's also 400 times farther away. So if you take something and move it as far away as it is larger than the other, they have the same size to us. Both the sun and the moon appear to be about a ½ degree across in our sky. Now, on rare occasions, the moon passes between us and the sun. Doesn't happen very often, about every year and a half somewhere in the world, usually in Timbuktu. And when that happens, the moon just barely covers the sun up. If the moon were a little smaller or a little farther away, it wouldn't do it at all. If it were larger or closer to us, it would be grossly over total. Wouldn't be nearly as spectacular. We get these rare and very spectacular eclipses.
Do you think that's a design that God gave to us?
It's if you look at the other satellites, 170 or so in the solar system, none of them have those kind of requirements. Either they don't happen at all, or they're grossly over total, so they're not very rare and they're not very spectacular. It takes. I read once that on a given place on the Earth, we get a total solar eclipse about once every 400 years. So either if you see one, you're either very lucky or you plan to be there to see the thing. And so these eclipses are spectacular and rare, and this is the only planet on which it matters, and it's the only planet on which it happens. I don't find that to be just a coincidence. I think there's more to it than that. But there's another more important thing about it. The moon's orbit is different. We have the plane of the Earth's orbit around the sun. We call this the ecliptic. Imagine a flat plane here. The sun's here, and every year the Earth goes around like this, and it causes the sun to seem to move through the stars. That defines this ecliptic across the sky, this big line across the sky, the plane of our orbit. Now, the moon's orbit is very close to that plane. It's tilted a few degrees, but basically the moon orbits around the Earth in the same plane that the Earth orbits around the sun. Of the 170 or so satellites in the solar system, it's the only one that does that.
Is that right?
All the others have different orbits. The most common type of orbit is above the equator of what we call the equatorial plane of the planet. And each of the planets have different tilts. Our own Earth's tilt's about 23.5 degrees. So if this is a plane of the Earth's orbit, there's another plane, the equatorial plane, that's tilted 23.5 degrees to that. And if the moon were like other satellites in the solar system, it would be orbiting in this plane, not in that plane. But the interesting thing is, that tells me something right away, that the origin of the moon must be different from other satellites. It must be unique, which we kind of know that from Genesis because the purpose is involved. I believe the moon is unique, and the origin scenario perhaps would be unique as well. And astronomers have tried to claim, well, we need to study the satellites of the other planets, hopefully to learn more where the moon came from. Well, I say nonsense, because the moon's orbit is unique in the solar system. But there's something else about the moon. If you compare the ratio between the mass of the moon and the mass of the Earth, it's pretty high. Earth has about 81 times more mass than the moon does. But when you look at other planets, they have thousands or tens of thousands of times more mass than their satellites have. So when you look at the ratio between the mass of the planet and the mass of the satellite, it's closest for the Earth by quite a bit, Earth-Moon, than it is for any other in the solar system. Now, this is tricky. The Earth, has a tilt of 23.5 degrees. That causes our seasons. But perturbing effects. The other things in the solar system are yanking on that tilt, and over time it would cause that tilt to change tremendously. It would go from being 23.5 degrees to being 0, to being 90, back to 0, waffle all over the place. It would slowly happen, but it would happen and waffle everywhere. What that would mean is that eventually there would be no seasons, and eventually most of the Earth's surface would be simultaneously in the tropics and in the Arctic regions. Could you imagine the devastating effect it would have on living creatures?
Sure.
That's if there's nothing else going on. The planets and the sun and everything else out there would do that to the Earth's tilt.
So why doesn't it?
Because of a very complex interaction of the moon, it stabilizes it and keeps the tilt within about a 2-degree range. It can't leave more than about 2 degrees, which we can withstand that small change. And that only happens if two things are true. If the mass ratio is high, which is unique to the Earth-Moon system, and this is critical, that the moon orbits in the ecliptic plane, not the equatorial plane. And it's the only satellite in the solar system for which that's the case. Now, again, you could argue that's a coincidence, but how many coincidences are you allowed before you begin to realize, well, maybe these coincidences aren't coincidences at all?